Hi everyone, my name is VHSRadio, and I have been playing Settlers of Catan since late 2020. I play on both Catan Universe and a free web-based Catan site called Colonist.io. If you haven't checked Colonist out, you should. You can play the game for free on their site, and if you join their Discord, you can participate in their open tournaments. It's a great way to get to know the community and improve at the game. Now, I started out, like many, as a more casual player, but over time I got more and more competitive and started taking the game more seriously. I started recording and analyzing my past games, and it vastly accelerated my improvement. And before I knew it, I was a Grand Master on Catan Universe. However, after reaching an ELO of around 1200, I sort of plateaued. And to continue improving, I need to more consistently analyze my play in a greater depth. And that brings me to the goal of this channel. Now, before I say anything else, I need to present this disclaimer. I am not even close to the best Catan player around. With that said, I have 3 goals for this channel. First, I want this channel to act as accountability for me to consistently analyze both my play and my opponent's play. I feel like so many Catan analysts are afraid to show when they lose and analyze why they lost. But those games are some of the most important ones to look at with a magnifying glass if you want to improve. Second, I want to prompt discussion with players of all levels, because as much analysis as you can do on your own, one of the best ways to improve at Catan is to talk about Catan. And lastly, while I acknowledge that my play is nowhere near optimal, I also believe that I have improved significantly over the last few months. And in these videos, I hope to present some distilled strategies that newer players can implement into their games and show game situations that explain why those concepts make sense. Now, with that said, let's get started. This is a 4-person game against 3 random opponents, and I'm placing 4th, also known as the turn. The first thing I always do is say good luck. It's a nice thing to do, but it also shows that I'm present in the game chat. I'm a big fan of table talk, so I'm happy to reach out and establish communications. Now, let's take a look at this board. Generally speaking, which resources are abundant or have the best dice values, and which ones are not? On this board, ore and wheat are abundant, brick and sheep are kind of middling, and wood is, well, miserable. Abundant ore and wheat combined with below average wood and brick indicate to me that I should attempt an ore wheat sheep strategy on this board. There are other videos that can probably explain what an ore wheat sheep strategy is in more detail, but for the purposes of this video, an ore wheat sheep strategy consists of placing on hexes that are heavy in ore, wheat, and or sheep with the intent of buying development cards and cities, which require only ore, wheat, and sheep, early and often. The win condition for this strategy typically comprises of at least 3 cities, largest army, and some combination of development card victory points and extra settlements or cities. Now, one drawback of this strategy is that you are typically lacking in wood and brick, making expansion difficult, but you can use trades, knights, or ports to soften the blow. While wheat is abundant on this board, it is not very accessible. Specifically, it tends to be very far from ore and only on coastlines, and this severely limits the number of tri-hex starting settlements that are available containing wheat. I need to take this into account when considering my placements. For example, I see 3 tri-hex starting settlements containing wheat: the 8-4-10, the 5-9-10, and either the 8-4-3 or 8-10-3. Meanwhile, there are 3 tri-hex starting settlement spots that I did not just list that contain ore. For example, the 5-9-10, 6-4-11, and 6-5-11. Now, usually ore is actually much harder to come by on a Catan board than wheat, meaning my first priority is usually finding ore. However, on this board, wheat is actually harder to come by than ore, meaning I need to make sure I either get wheat with my first placement or am satisfied with getting wheat on a coastal hex as my second pick. Now, another consideration is ports. Because wood is so poor on this board, ports are more important to me than usual. It is very important for me to settle in places where I can have easy access to at least one 3-1 port. But what about the 2-1 ports? The sheep and wheat ports both have a lot of respected resources nearby, which is worth considering. However, given the rarity of wheat on this board, these resource-specific 2-1 ports do not really strongly influence my placement strategy. Considering everything we just discussed, I want you to pause the video and think about what placements would make the most sense if you were picking first, second, third, and fourth. In my opinion, if you don't already do this, this is something you should immediately start trying to implement in your game. Now, I have another disclaimer. This is hard, like really hard, especially with the time limit of Catan Universe. I still struggle with it myself. But the more I did it, the better I got at it, and the more I started to realize how important it was to putting me in a position to win the game. Alright, let's look at some ideal starting placements for first position. Picking first has some advantages and disadvantages. You can pick any spot on the board, but it can be very difficult to predict where other players, especially weaker players, will place between your first and second placements. As a result, when I'm assigned first placement, I pick a spot that looks solid, try to guess 6 spots that the rest of the table might find enticing, and evaluate what's left when the dust settles. This strategy is very helpful on this board, as several first placements that might at first look reasonable are deceptively risky. For example, let's say I place on the 5, 9, 10 brick wheat. Earlier in the video, I said that I needed to prioritize wheat with my first placement, and this accomplishes that. However, let's see what is left for me when I have to make my second placement. I suspect the 8, 4, 10, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 11, 8, 10, 5, 9, 10 or sheep, and 6, 4, 11 will be picked in approximately that order. One nice thing about this pick is that it forces one of my opponents to place a settlement on the coast if they want wheat. However, when the dust settles, the only remaining viable spots are the 8-3 and I guess the 3-9-11? Unfortunately, wood is so poor on this board that I don't think picking 3-9-11 and trying a longest road strategy would work well on this board. A longest road strategy on this ore wheat sheep centric board still pretty much requires at least 2 cities for you to reach 10 points. How am I going to get the ore I need to build these cities? Trading with people who want ore even more than I do? Porting the wheat that I need to build the city in the first place? I just don't love my chances if I pick the 3-9-11. Now, let's say I choose the 8-3. I have strong ore and wheat, but no sheep, which I will need to address by either trading for it early or using the 3-1 port. This doesn't seem like a huge problem at first, until you see what everyone else ends up with. Everyone else has as much ore and slightly less wheat than I do, but they have sheep to go along with it, and I don't. This makes competing for the largest army race much harder for me. On top of that, what if the person who picked 6-5-11 picks the 8-3 with the intent of quickly expanding to the 6-3? That gives the 8-4-3 the 5-9-10 or sheep, and the 8-4-10 the 6-4-11. This could very well happen, and if it does, I'm kind of stuck with either the 5-2 or 3-9-11. Neither are good. In conclusion, I think this pick is pretty risky. If I place on the 8-4-3, I just put the 5-9-10 pick where the 8-4-3 pick was and face the same risk. I'll have strong or wheat sheep if the 8-3 isn't taken, but if the 8-3 isn't there for me at the end, I'm basically screwed because I most likely won't have any brick. So we've mapped some wheat selections, but let's see what happens if I neglect wheat and pick an ore spot. Let's say the 6-5-11. I suspect that the 8-4-10, 5-9-10 brick wheat, 8-4-3, 5-9-10 ore sheep, 6-4-11, and 3-9-11 all go. As a result, I end up being locked into either the 8-10 or the 6-3 to get wheat. Minus a production point here and there, I'm basically in the same position as if I had placed on the 5-9-10 or the 8-4-3. Granted, one positive aspect of this position is that the chances of getting locked out of wheat is basically zero. However, notice that the 3911 was picked in this example, while in the previous example, the 810 was picked. This is because me not selecting a tri-hex wheat spot allows all of my opponents to select tri-hex wheat spots, which in turn lets all of them place on tri-hex spots for their second settlement. In other words, my production would be similar to if I had picked 5, 9, 10 brick wheat, but I significantly improved the production of one of my opponents. Picking 5, 9, 10 or sheep and 6, 4, 11 result in basically the same problem, but I'll have more sheep and or wood in exchange for not having brick. Lastly, let's try out the 8, 4, 10. This placement gets me both ore and wheat, which greatly opens up my options when it comes back to me. I suspect that 5, 9, 10 brick wheat, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 11, 8, 10, 6, 4, 11, and 5, 9, 10 or sheep all go. That leaves the 3, 9, 11 and 6, 3, both of which are solid spots for me. If I pick the 3, 9, 11, I get all 5 resources, have balanced ore, wheat, and sheep, and have enough wood and brick to get me to the 3-1 port and double up on the 8 ore. And if I pick the 6-3, I basically have the same layout I was hoping for if I had picked the 5-9-10 first. Both of these options are playable, and it is exceedingly rare that neither of them will be available for me at my second pick. Given this analysis, if I was to place first, I would prefer the 8-4-10 for the flexibility and to relegate one of my opponents to a coastal placement. Let's see if Gray agrees. Yes, they do. I find out after the game that this player is a grandmaster, so I'm not surprised they made this decision. Their road direction also makes sense. They can expand to the 8 ore and the 3-1 port. Let's move on to second position. This analysis should hopefully be faster than our first position analysis. There are basically 2 choices to make here. Should I place on ore or wheat? I'll start by picking ore. The 6-5-11 seems reasonable enough. However, if the third and fourth positions get ore on their first placements and wheat on their second placements, the 5-9-10 and 8-4-3 will be gone by the time I can place again. This forces me into a coastal wheat spot such as the 6-3 or the 8-10. Both of these spots are playable, but placing on ore first prevents me from the opportunity to place on a tri-hex settlement on my second placement. To illustrate this, let's say I place on the 5-9-10 brick wheat instead. If the third and fourth positions get ore on their first placements and wheat on their second placements, which is totally reasonable, a tri-hex ore spot falls right in my lap, most likely either the 5-9-10 or sheep or the 6-4-11. I like this outlook much better. The 5-9-10 and 6-4-11 yield strictly better production than the 6-5-11 and 6-3, and the double 5-9-10s yield strictly better production than the 6-5-11 and 8-10. I will admit that this relies on both third and fourth positions getting ore with one pick and wheat with the other, which is not a guarantee. Let's say third position goes crazy and picks 2 ore spots, for example the 6-5-11 and 6-4-11. In that case, the 8-3 is still a playable position for me. On top of that, I'm not feeling too bad because third position just shot themselves in the foot by not getting any wheat. Executing an ore wheat sheep strategy without wheat, when everyone else on the board has wheat, is in my opinion almost impossible. I'll take a slightly suboptimal placement in exchange for one of my opponents being behind the 8 ball from the start. For the sake of completeness, picking the 8-4-3 would provide the same opportunity as the 5-9-10. However, I like 5-9-10 slightly better for a few reasons. First, it is a higher producing spot. Second, having multiple wheat hexes means that my wheat production can never be fully blocked. And third, I personally like the resource distribution and number diversity options of the 5-9-10 better than those of the 8-4-3. What does Purple think about this? Purple decides to place on the 8-4-3, which I think is fine. They made the correct decision to place on wheat and are poised to have a very strong second placement. Given how second position placed, in my opinion, there is only one reasonable place for third position to place, and that is the 5, 9, 10 brick wheat. This literally guarantees me a tri-hex ore placement when it comes back to me. More importantly, it forces fourth position to place on the coast if they want wheat, which is a brutal position to be in. However, red decides to place on the 5, 9, 10 ore sheep, which in my opinion is a huge blunder. They're close to the sheep port, which is nice, but the 5, 9, 10 brick wheat is not going to be there when it's their turn to place again. Wheat is going to be hard to come by on the backswing. And now we reach my actual placements. Third position's placement opens up all kinds of options for me as fourth position. I immediately know that I want to place on the 5, 9, 10 brick wheat, but I have to decide if the 6, 5, 11 or the 6, 4, 11 makes more sense for my second placement. Ultimately, I decide to place on the 6, 4, 11 for a couple reasons. First, despite the slight decrease in production, I value the increased sheep production and small amount of wood production to balance out my brick production. Second, the 6, 4, 11 allows me to point a road towards the 3, 1 port. As I said earlier in the video, I value 3, 1 ports highly on boards where wood or brick are scarce. Also, I generally don't love wheat ports because I would rather use wheat I do have to build cities and buy dev cards than port it for wood, so I'm relieved to have a 3, 1 port as my primary method of keeping my hand balanced. Back to third position. If I am third position, wheat is pretty much required for me to have a chance to win. As such, I have an important decision to make. Do I place on the 6, 3 or the 8, 10? I believe the 6, 3 is the best choice because placing on the 8, 10 prevents me from settling on the sheep port, which I need to compensate for my lack of brick. First position might place on the 8, 10 anyway for their second placement, but at least there's a chance that the port stays open. If I do place on the 6, 3, I think pointing my road to the right is best. Second position should take the 6, 5, 11, and if I am first position, I like the 8, 10 or the 3, 9, 11 better than the 8, 3, because they give me the sheep I need to start buying dev cards right away. Therefore, there's a good chance that the 8, 3 will not be taken, and expanding to the 8, 3 gives me the 3, 1 port and a second ore hex. However, third position chooses neither. They choose the 6, 5, 11. They block second position from that spot, which is great for everyone else at the table, but they shoot themselves in the foot before the game even begins. They have no access to wood or wheat, meaning they will need to trade or port for it. However, no one will want to trade away their wood because it's scarce, and no one will want to trade away their wheat because they'll be busy building cities and buying dev cards. It will be extremely difficult for them to get to the sheep port in time for it to help them in a significant way. Overall, third position just put themselves in a really difficult spot here. Third placement's decision shows why I value flexibility very highly when I'm choosing from early positions. As second position, I'm slightly disappointed that a tri-hex ore spot didn't fall to me, but I'm not in a terrible spot. I planned for this exact situation and am happy to take the 8, 3. In this situation, I believe that placing the road to the right makes the most sense. Doubling up on the ore will prepare me well for quick cities in the endgame. Plus, I believe it is in first position's best interest to settle on the 3, 1 port as soon as possible, so I have an advantage in the race to double up on ore. And worst case, if I lose the race, my road on the 8, 4, 3 is uncontested. Pointing the road to the left could be a waste if first position places on the 6, 3, and even if the 6, 3 is open, getting extra wheat will be less useful than getting extra ore, as cities require more ore than wheat. Lastly, pointing the road upward isn't very helpful. If I'm using an ore-wheat sheep strategy, I don't plan on expanding very much, so by the time I settle on the 3, 4, I won't really need the brick anymore. Conversely, I will be happy to use the extra ore to build cities and buy dev cards. Does second position agree? Second position agrees with the settlement location, but chooses what I believe to be the least optimal road direction. They are basically ceding the second ore expansion to first position if they want it, which is scary for everyone else at the table. At the end of the day, first position is given even better choices than I predicted. The 3-9-11, the 8-10, and the 6-3. To choose between these, I really have to split hairs. Personally, I would choose the 3-9-11 because it gives me wood, which speeds up my expansion to the 3-1 port, and sheep, which gives me all 3 resources needed to start buying dev cards right away. The largest army race is going to be extremely competitive, so the earlier I can start buying dev cards, the better. The 8-10 would also allow me to start buying dev cards right away, but would leave me without wood, which will make expansion extremely difficult. This pick also technically blocks the sheep port, but based on the third position's placements, I view them as the lowest threat of my opponents, so I wouldn't value this highly. And I think the 6-3, while not bad by any means, is the least optimal placement of the 3. This choice gets me to the 3-1 port at the same speed as the 3-9-11 does, but the lack of starting sheep could put me behind early in the largest army race. Of these choices, first position decides to place on the 6-3, which again is not bad and still very much playable, but is the least optimal choice of the 3 in my opinion. In addition, they place their road upward, presumably with the intent of expanding to the 9-2 and eventually getting sheep access. This makes sense on the surface, but in my opinion, first position's highest priority expansion spots should be the 3-1 port and doubling up on the 8 ore. By the time they settle on the 9-2, having access to sheep will not be very impactful. On top of that, third position will have a glut of sheep, which should make sheep for wheat trades beneficial for both parties. I personally would have pointed my road down, so I can double up on wheat and increase my fuel for dev cards, cities, trades with third position, and even ports if needed. The wood port is nice too, but should seldom be used on this board. Well, we made it. We decided which placements made the most sense at each position, and analyzed the placement decisions everyone actually made. Soon, I will release a part 2 video, which analyzes everyone's in-game choices in this same game, so watch out for that. But before I end this video, I want to summarize some of the lessons we learned from this board. For reference, some lessons are aimed at players who are newer at the game, and some are aimed at more advanced players. First, some more fundamental placement lessons. First, when you look at a board for the first time, get a good idea of which resources are abundant, middling, and scarce. Second, unless ore is scarce or taken by other players, ore wheat sheep is often a solid strategy on which to base your placements. And third, try to place roads in directions that will double up on important resources for your endgame, for example, ore and wheat. Now, here are some more maybe advanced placement strategies. In the moment, before placing your first settlement, intentionally guess which hexes you think will be taken between your first placement and your second placement. Second, while placing initial settlements, develop a good game plan for how you're going to reach a 3-1 port, or if you choose not to, have a good reason why. For example, you see a spot with exceptional resource distribution and production, or you have quick access to an abundant resource-specific port. And lastly, try to factor potential trade relationships into your own placement decisions and expansion goals. Now, before I go, I have one final lesson for everyone, regardless of your experience level. After each game, take a screenshot of the board and take a couple minutes to think through the placements that make the most sense and see how well it actually matches up with how everyone placed. This can take as much or as little time as you want, but making a habit of analyzing placements can be really illuminating. And with that, thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and happy settling.